What's up everyone, Mondo Loops here, and in this video I'm going to be breaking down a track from my recent Lo-Fi Girl album called Golden Age, and the song that I'm going to break down is the one that you can hear in the background now, and it's called The Last on Odd. It's one of my favourites from the album, and I thought it would be an interesting one to break down just to show you how I wrote the guitar and some of the VSTs and processes that I used to finish the track. So yeah, big thank you to everyone at Lo-Fi Records for supporting this album. It's got some of my favourite songs that I've ever written, and there's a real array of different influences and sounds that came through on this album, so I would really appreciate it if you could check out the full album. But for now, I'm going to go in and break down the track. So this track started off on the guitar. I recorded the intro section and the chord progression, as well as some of the solo bits. And then from there, I started to layer in the extra elements of the track. So the track was in 106 BPM. It was in 4/4 time. And the guitar was tuned to drop D, which just means that I tune the low E down to D. And this tuning often reminds me of a track that goes like this. So bonus points if you can recognise that track. Let me know in the comments down below if you do. But I used a similar ideology in that I could let the D ring out while I sort of jammed out on the D major scale. So the track is in D major, and the chord progression is a sort of shell voicing on the guitar, which means I'm not playing the full triad, but I'm playing, say, the 1 and the 3, or the 1 and the 7 to just imply the chords without playing the full thing. And the reason I like doing stuff like this is because it leaves a lot of freedom often to solo and jam and fill out the chords with other instruments and sounds, versus sometimes if you're using complex jazz chord progressions, for example, the track can begin to get quite full and it's just generally more complicated to solo over. So for me, I like to keep things simple when I'm writing, and that's how I started this track off. So I'm essentially starting off with a D major shell chord. And the way I'm playing everything is I'm muting it with the palm and I'm sort of playing it fingerstyle. That's the first chord. So I'm essentially playing D, D, F sharp, or the 1 and the 3 of the D major chord. And then I go down to the sort of E minor 7. So I'm playing the 1 and the 7 in this case, which is the D, and the E. So D major, E minor 7, shell. And the way I'm playing that is open D, 5th fret on the A string, 4th fret on the D string. And then to the second chord, I move the 4th fret on the D string to the 2nd fret on the D string. So it's open 5, 2. Then I go up to a G major. This time it's just the full triad. So I'm playing the sort of 1, 5, 3, G, D, B. And I'm borrowing the 5th fret. So I can play the 5th on the open D and the 5th on the A. And the 9th fret on the D string. That's just a sort of G major in this picking pattern. And then I move the 9th fret down to the 7th fret for a sort of G sus2 chord. So that's the main guitar progression that I started with, and then it starts to loop around and I'll layer in guitar, piano and some other textures as well. So I'll just jump into the project file now to show you how it sounds. And quickly before I go into the project file and show you all these tips that took this track to the next level, I know a lot of you aren't necessarily guitar players or aren't that competent on guitar, and I would highly recommend taking some of this theory and taking some of these ideas and transferring them to other instruments, because you can get some really interesting results when you do that, and it helps you sort of look at things in a different way. And if you are interested in potentially learning some guitar or enhancing any element of your music production, then I would highly recommend you checking out today's video sponsor, which is Skillshare. For those of you who haven't heard of Skillshare, it is the biggest online learning community out there, with industry leading experts covering topics from music production to learning instruments to productivity and marketing, and essentially everything you need to enhance your music production journey. So if you want to invest in yourself, I would highly recommend checking it out. So when you first create your account, you can pick all of the areas that are interesting to you, and it will tailor all the recommendations based on that. So let's focus on music at the minute. Now we've got this personalized profile full of some really interesting lessons. You can see straight away Elijah Fox, incredible pianist, would highly recommend checking his stuff out. Also, of course, you've got the famous Jacob Collier with, I'm sure, some very interesting lessons in there too. And you can go down and find a recommended learning path, which is essentially a range of handpicked lessons that focus on something specific. For example, this is the learning guitar pathway. So it's got a range of lessons from creating your own sound to learning scales and improvisation, all the way up to more complex modes and guitar theory. The first 500 people to click the link in the description down below will get 1 month free, so it's well worth hopping on there, having a look at a couple of the lessons available and seeing if it's right for you or not. Plus, if you sign up for your free trial in the next 2 weeks after the video launches and you go over and send me a screenshot of your profile, I'm going to send you back the Dreamy Lo-Fi Hip Hop Volume 1 sample pack completely free. So be sure to do that while the time allows. So well worth checking out Skillshare. But anyway, onto this project file. So I'll just show you some of the key elements of the track. If there's anything that I miss or there's anything you want to know about the track or the album, do let me know in the comments down below and I'll get back to your comments. And if you want any more in-depth tutorials about specific elements of potentially mixing, mastering, whatever it may be, I also make a load of videos on my YouTube channel. So you can search Mondo Loops on YouTube and I post weekly tutorials and breakdowns, and I'll likely be breaking down some other tracks from the album as well. But anyway, into the project. So it starts off with the sort of ambient drop D guitar jam that I talked about, and that blends in with a nice warm vinyl texture and a coffee shop atmos. So that's from one of my sample packs. And the ambient guitar blends into the main sort of guitar riff that I talked about earlier. So I've got the guitar riff, which is going through my Laney L5 amp. Then it goes DI, and for cab emulation I'm using this Amplitude plugin at the minute. I also tested out a plugin recently by Matteo Sasato, which is fantastic, and I'm going to be mixing up my guitar chains soon. So that also blends in with the piano. So the piano is the Imaginary piano. Shout out to Imaginary for making this amazing plugin. This is the main sort of warmth, and to add a little bit of texture on the top end, I use a plugin called Leco, which is a sort of a more intrinsically dirty sort of analog warmth and texture and grit plugin. So I use that for the top end just for a little bit more the brightness and the texture that it brings. Next up, I layer in some vocals from the Spitfire Audio 11 Lens plugin. It's got some really nice vocal textures and they add a nice sort of droney ambient warmth to the track. So I'm applying some filtering just to cut off the top end of the vocals. I'm using Decapitator by Soundtoys, which is adding some grit and warmth to the sample. And then I'm using a Portal, which is a granular synthesis plugin. And I'm using this to add a little bit of reverse swells and reverse sort of delay textures. Next up, the way that I add a lot of organic warmth and texture to the track is by using various stacks of vocal pads. So the way I'll do that is I'll take different vocal patches from different software. So I use stuff like Auras by Slate & Ash. There's various Spitfire Audio plugins and anything really with just a soft vocal pad. And what I do is I'll take the chords that go over the top of the track, and I'll take different notes from different chords and put them to different VSTs and then pan them in different directions as well. And overall it sounds like this. So it just gives it sort of movement and width to the track, along with some interesting sounds and textures. And you can mix up what plugins you use. You can layer loads of them on top of each other. If they start to get a bit muddy, I usually group them together and process them that way. So I cut some of the lows and sort of tidy them up in that regard. But yeah, that's how it sounds. So now I had the main sort of core of the track. I start to layer in some of the drums and the bass. So the next thing I did is record a bass line, which is just essentially playing the same thing as the guitar in a slightly different pattern, just to vary it up a bit, with a little riff in there. And that textures nicely with the guitar and the piano. And I've not got everything playing the same thing, so there is a little bit of variation to each instrument, which keeps it interesting. So time to add some drums. So for the drums, start off with the kick. I'm using ML Lo-Fi Kick 1, which is from my organic Lo-Fi Hip Hop sample pack. And I'm layering that with Kick Felt Soft Dry, which is a Ableton sort of stock sound. And that just gives it the brighter, sort of airy sound to the kick. Then we can layer in some snares. So I'm using Addictive Drums for the snares, cutting off the highs a little bit there. Addictive Drums is a fantastic VST full of some amazing drum sounds. I'm using the Jazz Brush kit as well as the Soul kit, I believe. So I've got a little rim shot and I sort of layer that with some just generic snare sounds for the fills and the sort of adding groove to the track. And I've also got this little dramatic drum fill at the end of some of the sections. So that's a sort of drum fill with some filtering and reverb. And the fill sample was from my Chill Lo-Fi drum kit, which I released with another Lo-Fi girl artist, Be Calm. So the kit we recorded in a studio, but this sample I pitched down use a bit of manipulation on the timing and add some filtering to get this effect. So the drums and the snares, always the most important part to get the groove of the track. And then from there, you can start to layer in some texture. So a little Foley trigger, which is, again, using Foley samples from Organic Lofi Volume 1 I released. And I've essentially chopped it up and used an arpeggiator to trigger different sections of the sample. So the sample, firstly, I make sure fits the vibe of the track on its own. And then I can chop it up by transient. And this arpeggiator just triggers random sections. So I guess every time I play the track, it'll be slightly different. But the overall vibe works every time. Just triggering some random samples. From there, layer in some more addictive keys, cymbals and hats. And a couple of different samples. So one is a clocky sort of grandfather clock sample, which I'm using a lot because I think it adds a really nice organic crunch to the track. And then finally some soft hi-hat brush loops as well. So that is most of the track. And then from there, it's just final touches. So layering in some soft trumpet textures with lots of reverb and sort of cutting off the highs a bit. Layer some guitar lead, again in D major. And just some final piano touches to help blend the track together. So yeah, that pretty much covers it. It's probably the most minimal track on the album in terms of how many layers and stems went into it. But I think sometimes keeping a track minimal can work really well when it's got this sort of core working. I don't want to overdo it with too many vocals or pads or sounds that end up muddying up the mix. So thank you very much for watching. Please do check out the full album when you get a minute, and let me know in the comments down below if there's anything that you want me to cover in more detail. But for now, huge thanks to the Lofi Records team for having me on here, and catch you next time.